The sun rose lazily over the bustling city, casting its golden light across the cracked sidewalks and towering buildings. In a small, dimly lit apartment on the city's outskirts, Marcus Anderson sat hunched over a wooden easel, his hands moving deftly as his brush danced across the canvas. Paint-streaked fingers, worn from years of dedication, created a vibrant tapestry of colors that brought his vision to life. This was his sanctuary, a space where the noise of the world faded, leaving only the hum of his creative spirit. Marcus had always been an artist at heart. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, he found solace in sketching the world around him. While other children played outside, Marcus would sit by the window, pencil in hand, capturing the essence of his environment, the cracks in the pavement, the laughter of neighbors, and the stoic gaze of the old man who sold newspapers on the corner. His mother, a nurse working endless shifts to make ends meet, encouraged his passion, often bringing home scraps of paper or discounted art supplies from thrift stores. But the world outside his bubble wasn't always as kind. Marcus quickly learned that his skin color and humble background set him apart in the art world, a realm dominated by wealth, privilege, and exclusivity. He faced rejection after rejection, hearing the same excuses cloaked in polite words. "Your work doesn't fit our aesthetic," or "we're looking for something more refined." Despite the constant discouragement, Marcus refused to give up. He believed in the power of his art, which reflected the beauty and resilience of his community. Life for Marcus was a balancing act. By day, he worked 2 jobs, one as a barista at a local coffee shop and the other as a janitor at an art school he could never afford to attend. At night, he painted tirelessly in his tiny apartment, his dreams fueling every stroke of his brush. His days were long, and his nights even longer, but Marcus carried the weight of his aspirations with quiet determination. One fateful afternoon, Marcus decided to take a leap of faith. Clutching a portfolio of his best pieces, he ventured into the heart of the city, where prestigious galleries lined the streets like temples of the elite. Among them was the Thornton Gallery, a name synonymous with wealth and high culture. Its owner, Gerald Thornton, was a well-known figure in the art world, respected by some, feared by others, and infamous for his sharp tongue and elitist views. Marcus stood outside the gallery, his heart pounding in his chest. He stared at the polished glass doors, which reflected a version of himself he barely recognized, an artist desperate for validation in a world that rarely gave second chances. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, greeted by the sterile smell of varnish and the low murmur of patrons discussing the pieces on display. The interior of the Thornton Gallery was nothing short of opulent. Pristine white walls showcased abstract masterpieces framed in gold. Soft lighting illuminated each piece, casting an almost ethereal glow. Marcus felt out of place in his simple jeans and worn sneakers, but he reminded himself why he was there. He approached the reception desk, where a young assistant eyed him with thinly veiled skepticism. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Thornton," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the nerves that twisted in his stomach. "I have some work I'd like to show him." The assistant raised an eyebrow, her gaze flickering to the portfolio in his hands. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone clipped. "No, but Mr. Thornton doesn't see walk-ins," she interrupted, her expression shifting to one of dismissal. "We only accept submissions through curated channels." Before Marcus could respond, a commanding voice echoed from the adjacent room. "Who's that?" Gerald Thornton emerged, his tailored suit and perfectly coiffed hair exuding an air of superiority. His piercing blue eyes scanned Marcus, sizing him up in an instant. "What's going on here?" The assistant hesitated before gesturing to Marcus. "He's here to show you his work, but he doesn't have an appointment." Gerald's lips curled into a condescending smile as he approached. "Ah, I see," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Let me guess, self-taught, passionate about your craft, and looking for your big break?" Marcus straightened his posture, refusing to let the insult sting. "I am self-taught, and yes, I'm passionate about my work. I believe my art could add value to your gallery." The room fell silent for a moment as Gerald studied him, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Well, let's see it then," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Marcus opened his portfolio, revealing a collection of vibrant paintings that captured the essence of urban life. Each piece told a story, the struggles, the joy, and the resilience of a community often overlooked. There were depictions of children playing in the rain, elderly women braiding hair on stoops, and musicians performing on street corners. The colors were bold, the details meticulous, and the emotions palpable. But Gerald barely glanced at the artwork. Instead, he looked at Marcus with a smirk that made the younger man's blood boil. "Interesting," Gerald said finally, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But this isn't the kind of work we showcase here. It's too raw, too unsophisticated. My clients prefer something with more refinement, pieces that speak to a higher level of taste." Marcus clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the dark leather of his portfolio. "My work speaks to real life," he countered. "It tells the stories of people who don't often get a voice in spaces like this." Gerald chuckled, the sound cold and hollow. "And that's precisely the problem. This gallery caters to collectors who appreciate art as an investment, not a social commentary. Your work, well, let's just say it doesn't belong here." The words hit Marcus like a blow to the chest. He had prepared himself for rejection, but not for such blatant condescension. Still, he refused to let Gerald see him falter. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice steady, despite the fire burning inside him. As Marcus turned to leave, Gerald's parting words rang in his ears. "Good luck," the gallery owner sneered. "You'll need it." Stepping back into the bustling streets, Marcus felt a mix of anger and determination bubbling within him. He clutched his portfolio tightly, vowing that this moment would not define him. If Gerald Thornton and his elitist world couldn't see the value in his art, he would find another way to prove them wrong. This rejection, Marcus decided, was not the end of his story, it was just the beginning. Marcus walked home that evening with a heavy heart and his portfolio clutched under his arm. The rejection from Gerald Thornton stung deeply, not because it was unexpected, but because it laid bare the uphill battle he faced as a black artist in an unforgiving, elitist art world. But even as the pain of humiliation lingered, a fire burned inside him, a determination to prove Gerald and others like him wrong. The next morning, Marcus sat in his tiny apartment, staring at the vibrant paintings scattered across his workspace. He refused to let one man's opinion define his worth. He needed guidance, someone who could help him navigate this world that seemed intent on shutting him out. Little did he know, help was closer than he imagined. A fateful encounter. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon at the coffee shop where Marcus worked. He had just finished preparing a cappuccino when he noticed a woman sitting by the window, engrossed in a sketchbook. Her hands moved with practiced ease, capturing the scene outside with remarkable precision. Intrigued, Marcus approached her table hesitantly. "Excuse me," he said, setting a fresh napkin on the table. "I couldn't help but notice your sketch. It's incredible." The woman looked up, her sharp gray eyes softening as she smiled. She was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair tied in a loose bun and a demeanor that radiated both warmth and authority. "Thank you," she said, gesturing for Marcus to sit. "Are you an artist?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with both pride and uncertainty. I'm trying to make it as one, at least." The woman introduced herself as Clara Moreau, a renowned artist whose work had graced galleries worldwide. Marcus recognized her name immediately, she was a legend in the art community. What followed was an animated conversation about art, passion, and the barriers faced by artists of color. Marcus shared his struggles and the story of his encounter with Gerald Thornton. Clara listened intently, her expression growing serious. "That man," she said, shaking her head, "is the epitome of everything wrong with the art world. But you don't need his validation, Marcus. Your work speaks volumes, and I'd love to help you find your audience." Lessons from a mentor. Over the weeks that followed, Clara became both a mentor and a friend to Marcus. She invited him to her studio, a sprawling space filled with canvases, sculptures, and photographs documenting her decades-long career. There, she began teaching him the ins and outs of the art industry. "You have the talent," Clara said one evening as they examined his latest painting. "But in this world, talent isn't enough. You need to understand how to market yourself, how to network, and how to build your brand. The system is broken, but that doesn't mean you can't navigate it." Clara taught Marcus how to curate a cohesive portfolio and craft a compelling artist statement. She introduced him to the power of social media, urging him to showcase his work online. "The internet is a great equalizer," she explained. "It allows you to reach people who would never step foot in a gallery like Thornton's." Under Clara's guidance, Marcus started an Instagram page and a personal website. He shared not only his artwork, but also the stories behind each piece. His posts resonated with people, especially those from marginalized communities who saw their lives reflected in his vibrant portrayals. Slowly but surely, his following grew. A breakthrough moment. One day, Marcus received a message that would change his life. A prominent art collector, Elena Vargas, had stumbled across his work online and was captivated by his unique perspective. Elena was known for championing emerging artists, and her endorsement often served as a golden ticket to success. The message was simple: "Your work speaks to the soul. I'd like to purchase one of your pieces and discuss representing you to my network. Are you available to meet?" Marcus could hardly believe it. He called Clara immediately, his voice trembling with excitement. "This could be it," he said, pacing his tiny apartment. "It is," Clara replied, her tone filled with pride. "But remember, Marcus, this is just the beginning. Stay true to yourself and your vision." The meeting with Elena was a turning point. She purchased a large painting titled Soul of the Streets, a vivid depiction of children playing under a graffiti-covered bridge. The piece sold for more money than Marcus had ever imagined earning from his art. More importantly, Elena used her influence to introduce him to gallery owners, collectors, and curators who were genuinely interested in his work. The ripple effect. The impact of Elena's endorsement was immediate and far-reaching. Invitations to high-profile exhibitions started pouring in, each opportunity bigger than the last. Marcus's work was featured in a group show at a well-known gallery, where it drew rave reviews from critics and patrons alike. One review described his art as a masterful blend of raw emotion and technical brilliance, capturing the vibrancy of urban life with unmatched authenticity. With each success, Marcus's confidence grew. He began to experiment more, incorporating elements of abstract expressionism and mixed media into his pieces. His storytelling became even more powerful, touching on themes of identity, resilience, and community. Every brushstroke was a declaration: "I belong here." Marcus's rise was meteoric. Within a year, his paintings were selling for tens of thousands of dollars, and his name became synonymous with a new wave of artists challenging the status quo. He was invited to speak at art forums and panel discussions, where he shared his journey and advocated for greater diversity in the art world. Reflecting on the journey. Despite his growing fame, Marcus remained grounded. He never forgot the struggles that had shaped him or the people who had supported him along the way. Clara remained a constant presence in his life, her guidance as invaluable as ever. One evening, as they sat together in her studio, Marcus reflected on his journey. "Do you think Gerald Thornton knows who I am now?" he asked with a sly smile. Clara chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure he does. But it doesn't matter, Marcus. What matters is that you've created a space for yourself, and for others like you." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. He knew that his story was far from over, and he was determined to use his platform to uplift other artists who faced the same barriers he had. The world that once rejected him now celebrated him, not because he conformed to its expectations, but because he stayed true to himself. The Thornton Gallery, once a cornerstone of the city's elite art scene, was beginning to show cracks. Gerald Thornton, its owner and self-proclaimed arbiter of high art, prided himself on maintaining what he called a refined atmosphere. For decades, his gallery had thrived on exclusivity, catering to wealthy collectors and showcasing works that conformed to his narrow definition of sophistication. But the art world was changing, and Gerald was too blind, or too stubborn, to adapt. A changing landscape. As the years went by, the art industry began to embrace diversity and innovation. Social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok provided a stage for artists who had been excluded from traditional galleries. Collectors, once reliant on curators like Gerald to dictate trends, now discovered emerging talents online, bypassing the gatekeepers entirely. For Gerald, this shift was an affront to his sensibilities. He dismissed online artists as amateurs and scoffed at the idea of digital platforms shaping the art world. Real art, he often proclaimed to his dwindling circle of clients, belongs in galleries, not on screens. But his refusal to evolve had consequences. Young collectors, drawn to fresh perspectives and diverse narratives, stopped frequenting Thornton Gallery. Even some of his longtime clients grew disillusioned, tired of the same recycled aesthetics and Gerald's increasingly antiquated views. Artists, too, began avoiding his gallery, wary of his reputation for dismissiveness and prejudice. The first signs of decline. The decline was subtle at first. Gerald noticed fewer attendees at his exhibitions and slower sales, but he chalked it up to a temporary lull. However, as months turned into years, the reality became impossible to ignore. Empty walls stared back at him as he walked through his gallery, and invoices for unsold artwork piled up on his desk. One afternoon, Gerald's assistant approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Thornton," she said, holding a report, "our quarterly revenue is down by 40%. If this continues..." Gerald cut her off with a dismissive wave. "It's a phase," he said, his voice laced with impatience. "These things happen in the art world. Our clients will return once they realize quality matters more than trends." But they didn't return. Meanwhile, whispers of Gerald's increasingly sour demeanor began to circulate in art circles. Stories of his condescending remarks and elitist attitudes spread like wildfire, further tarnishing the gallery's reputation. Artists who once sought his approval now openly criticized him, calling out his outdated practices and lack of inclusivity. The shadow of success. Ironically, while Gerald's gallery struggled, the art world buzzed with the meteoric rise of Marcus Anderson. His vibrant, evocative paintings had captured the attention of collectors and critics alike, and his name was on everyone's lips. Marcus's story, an artist who defied the odds to achieve global recognition, resonated deeply with audiences. His work, celebrated for its authenticity and emotional depth, became a symbol of a new era in art. Gerald, ever detached from the broader art community, heard snippets of Marcus's success, but failed to make the connection. To him, Marcus Anderson was just another online sensation, someone whose fame would fade as quickly as it had risen. He refused to acknowledge the growing influence of this new wave of artists, clinging stubbornly to his belief in traditional values. But as Marcus's reputation grew, so did the demand for his work. High-profile exhibitions, magazine features, and collaborations with prestigious institutions solidified his status as a powerhouse in the art world. It wasn't long before his name reached even the most resistant corners of the industry. The breaking point. For Gerald, the financial strain became unbearable. The gallery was bleeding money, and his personal savings were dwindling. The staff, once a robust team of curators and assistants, had shrunk to a skeleton crew. With no other options, Gerald was forced to cut back on exhibitions, further alienating the few clients who still remained. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, the weight of his situation finally hit him. Bills and foreclosure notices cluttered his desk, and the once pristine gallery was eerily silent. He poured himself a glass of scotch, his hands trembling as he stared at the walls adorned with unsold artwork. "How did it come to this?" he muttered, bitterness creeping into his voice. The answer was painfully clear: his refusal to change, his arrogance, and his prejudiced views had driven his gallery, and his legacy, into the ground. Marcus learns the truth. Meanwhile, Marcus's life had transformed. He now lived in a spacious loft filled with light and color, a stark contrast to the cramped apartment where he had started. But despite his success, he remained humble, always mindful of the people and experiences that shaped him. Clara, his mentor, often visited, offering sage advice and celebrating his achievements with quiet pride. One day, as Marcus scrolled through industry news, a headline caught his attention: Thornton Gallery faces closure amid financial struggles. The article detailed the gallery's fall from grace, citing Gerald's outdated practices and dwindling client base. Marcus read the piece carefully, his mind flashing back to that fateful day when Gerald had dismissed him without a second thought. A strange mix of emotions welled up inside him. There was satisfaction, yes, validation that Gerald's arrogance had led to his downfall. But there was also an undeniable sense of pity. Marcus knew the pain of rejection and the struggle to be seen, even if Gerald's wounds were self-inflicted. When Clara heard the news, she raised an eyebrow. "So," she said, her tone teasing, "what are you going to do about it?" Marcus looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I think it's time for a visit to the Thornton Gallery," he said. "But not as an artist this time, as a buyer, the plan in motion." Marcus sat in the quiet of his loft, the skyline of the city glittering through the wide windows. The Thornton Gallery's demise had been the talk of the art world for weeks, and Marcus had read every article and whispered rumor. Gerald Thornton's once proud empire was now teetering on the brink of collapse, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that fate had handed him an opportunity. Buying the gallery, Marcus mused aloud. He let the words linger in the air, the weight of the idea sinking in. Clara, sitting across from him with a mug of tea in hand, raised an eyebrow. "It would send a message," she said with a sly smile. "But if you're going to do this, you need to do it right. No grandstanding. No unnecessary drama. Let him sell it without ever knowing who the buyer is, until the final moment." Marcus chuckled. "You always did have a flair for theatrics." Together, they devised a plan. Marcus would remain anonymous throughout the negotiation process, working through intermediaries to keep his identity hidden. The anonymity would give him leverage. Gerald, desperate and out of options, wouldn't think to question a serious offer. Clara put Marcus in touch with a trusted lawyer, Ms. Evelyn Cole, who agreed to handle the negotiations on his behalf. "Let's make this as uncomfortable for him as possible," Clara joked as they finalized the details. "But not too uncomfortable. We want him to sell, after all." The negotiation begins. The Thornton Gallery had been listed quietly, with Gerald hoping to avoid public humiliation. It wasn't officially on the market, but word had spread among a small circle of potential buyers. Gerald's pride was still intact enough to make him reluctant to openly admit defeat, but his financial woes were dire. Evelyn reached out with a formal offer, submitting it through a shell company Marcus had set up. The offer was generous, but not extravagant, enough to pique Gerald's interest while leaving room for negotiation. Gerald's initial response was hesitant. He called Evelyn directly, his tone sharp and probing. "Who exactly are you representing?" he demanded. Evelyn, calm and composed, replied, "My client wishes to remain anonymous, but I assure you they are a serious buyer with a genuine interest in preserving the gallery's legacy." Gerald scoffed. "Preserve the legacy? How noble. What's the catch?" "No catch," Evelyn said smoothly. "But we will need to review all financial records before finalizing the purchase." The mention of financial records made Gerald pause. He knew the gallery's books were far from flattering, but he couldn't afford to lose this potential buyer. Reluctantly, he agreed to move forward with negotiations. Hardball tactics. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn and Gerald engaged in a tense back and forth. Marcus, observing from the sidelines, couldn't help but marvel at Evelyn's skill. She played hardball, scrutinizing every detail of the gallery's finances and pushing Gerald to lower his asking price. "It's a buyer's market," Evelyn told him during one particularly heated phone call. "Your gallery's reputation isn't what it used to be, and my client is taking on significant risk by investing in it. We're willing to proceed, but only at a reasonable valuation." Gerald, cornered and desperate, lashed out. "This gallery has been a cornerstone of the art world for decades. Your client should be grateful for the chance to own it. And yet, here we are, Evelyn replied coolly. You need this sale, Mr. Thornton, more than we need this purchase. The negotiation stretched on, with Gerald reluctantly agreeing to terms that left him with far less than he'd hoped for. By the end of it, he was exhausted, his pride battered, but his desperation overriding any lingering doubts. The final signing. The day of the signing arrived. Gerald sat in his office, the once grand space now cluttered with paperwork and half-packed boxes. He'd agreed to meet the buyer in person, a requirement Evelyn had insisted upon. He assumed it was a mere formality, an opportunity for some wealthy investor to gloat over their new acquisition. Marcus, dressed in a tailored suit, entered the gallery for the first time since his rejection. He felt a wave of nostalgia and irony as he walked past the familiar walls, now bare and devoid of life. Evelyn accompanied him, her briefcase in hand and her expression unreadable. Gerald stood as they entered, his handshake firm but his eyes wary. I take it you're here to oversee the final details, he said to Evelyn, barely sparing Marcus a glance. Evelyn smiled. Actually, Mr. Thornton, I'd like to introduce you to the buyer. She stepped aside, revealing Marcus. For a moment, Gerald's face was a mask of confusion. Then recognition dawned, followed by a flicker of disbelief. You, he said, his voice low and incredulous. It's you. Marcus met his gaze evenly. Hello, Gerald. Long time no see. The confrontation. The room was thick with tension as Gerald processed what was happening. His mind raced, replaying the day he'd dismissed Marcus with cruel condescension. Now, the aspiring artist he had mocked was standing before him, not as a supplicant, but as the man buying his gallery. This is some kind of joke, Gerald stammered, his composure unraveling. No joke, Marcus said calmly. I wanted to see this through in person. Closure, you could say. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Is this revenge? You think buying my gallery proves something? Marcus shook his head. It's not about revenge. It's about taking control of something you never thought I was worthy of. You wrote me off without a second thought, Gerald. But look where we are now. Gerald sank into his chair, his bravado crumbling. Why? Why would you want this place after everything? Marcus glanced around the room, a small smile playing on his lips. Because it has potential. Despite everything, I see what this gallery could be, a place where real art that tells stories and represents everyone, can thrive. You wouldn't understand, but that's okay. You're not the one making decisions anymore. Marcus's triumph. The signing proceeded in silence, Gerald's signature shaky but resigned. When the final document was signed, Marcus extended his hand. For a moment, Gerald hesitated, then shook it reluctantly. Good luck, Mr. Thornton, Marcus said, his tone polite but firm. I think you'll find the art world is much bigger than you ever imagined. As Marcus left the gallery, he felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, not just for himself, but for every artist who had been told they didn't belong. The Thornton Gallery, once a symbol of exclusion, was now in his hands. It was time to transform it into something greater. A vision reborn. The day Marcus officially took ownership of the gallery was one of quiet triumph. Standing in the center of the empty space, he imagined what it could become, a haven for artists like himself, whose voices had been overlooked for too long. The Thornton Gallery, with its legacy of exclusivity, was no more. In its place, Marcus envisioned a new institution, one that celebrated diversity, innovation, and authenticity. He renamed it the Mosaic Gallery, a name that symbolized unity through individuality. Art is a mosaic of experiences, Marcus explained during the press release. Each piece, each artist, brings a unique perspective, and together, they create something beautiful. From the moment the rebranding was announced, excitement buzzed throughout the city's art community. Marcus's reputation as a trailblazer preceded him, and there was palpable anticipation for what the Mosaic Gallery would bring to the table. The first exhibition, a celebration of stories. Marcus poured his heart and soul into curating the gallery's inaugural exhibition, aptly titled Stories Untold. He reached out to underrepresented artists from diverse backgrounds, painters, sculptors, photographers, and mixed-media creators, giving them a platform to showcase their work. Each piece selected for the exhibition told a powerful story, from the struggles of immigrant families to the resilience of LGBTQ+ communities and the beauty of everyday life in underserved neighborhoods. The opening night was electric. The gallery was packed with attendees, artists, collectors, critics, and members of the local community, many of whom had never felt welcome in a space like this before. Marcus stood at the center of it all, greeting visitors and speaking passionately about each artist's work. He made it a point to highlight the stories behind the art, ensuring that the focus remained on the creators rather than himself. One of the most talked about pieces was a sprawling mural by a young Latina artist named Sofia Ramirez, depicting the intergenerational journey of her family. Another standout was a series of photographs by a formerly incarcerated man who used his lens to capture moments of humanity within the prison system. Each piece resonated deeply with the audience, sparking conversations that lasted long after the event ended. Critics praised the exhibition as groundbreaking. "Marcus Anderson has redefined what a gallery can be," wrote one reviewer. "The Mosaic Gallery is not just a space for art, it's a space for dialogue, understanding, and transformation." The ripple effect. The success of Stories Untold had a profound impact. Emerging artists began flocking to the Mosaic Gallery, drawn by its mission and Marcus's reputation as a champion for the underdog. Marcus established a residency program, providing studio space and mentorship to talented artists who lacked resources. He also launched an initiative to bring art workshops to schools and underserved communities, ensuring that the next generation of creatives had opportunities he had once struggled to find. The community embraced the Mosaic Gallery wholeheartedly. Local businesses partnered with the gallery to sponsor events, and Marcus's workshops became a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Parents who had never stepped foot in an art gallery found themselves attending exhibitions, inspired by the accessibility and inclusivity of the space. Financially, the gallery thrived. Marcus's network of collectors, combined with the gallery's innovative programming, drew significant revenue. Unlike the Thornton Gallery's rigid, profit-driven model, the Mosaic Gallery reinvested its earnings into supporting artists and expanding its reach. A moment of reflection. Amid the whirlwind of success, Marcus often thought about the path that had brought him here. One evening, he found himself alone in the gallery, surrounded by the vibrant works of art that adorned the walls. He thought about Clara, whose mentorship had been a lifeline during his darkest days, and about Gerald Thornton, whose rejection had inadvertently sparked his journey. To Marcus's surprise, Gerald reached out to him a few months after the gallery's reopening. The email was short and hesitant, but the message was clear: Gerald wanted to meet. Marcus agreed, though he approached the meeting with cautious optimism. They met at a small cafe near the gallery, a neutral ground for what was sure to be an awkward conversation. Gerald looked older and wearier than Marcus remembered. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. "I owe you an apology," Gerald began, his voice heavy with regret. "I misjudged you, not just as an artist, but as a person. I let my prejudice and my ego blind me to what you had to offer." Marcus listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Gerald continued, "Seeing what you've done with the gallery, it's humbling. You've created something far greater than I ever could." After a long pause, Marcus finally spoke. "Thank you for saying that. I don't hold on to grudges, Gerald, but I won't lie, what you said to me back then stuck with me. It fueled me. But this gallery isn't about proving you wrong. It's about proving to myself, and to others like me, that we belong." The conversation ended amicably, with Gerald expressing a desire to contribute to the Mosaic Gallery's initiatives. Whether his motives were purely altruistic or an attempt at redemption, Marcus decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Everyone deserves a second chance, Clara had once told him, and Marcus was determined to live by that philosophy. A legacy cemented. Years passed, and the Mosaic Gallery became a beacon in the art world. It inspired other galleries to adopt similar models, prioritizing inclusivity and community engagement over elitism. Marcus's story, from struggling artist to industry leader, became a testament to resilience and the power of staying true to one's vision. One day, as Marcus prepared for the gallery's 5th anniversary celebration, Clara visited him in his office. She looked around at the bustling space, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it," Marcus corrected, smiling. "I couldn't have done this without you." The anniversary exhibition, titled Building Bridges, featured works from artists across the globe, each piece exploring themes of connection and unity. As Marcus addressed the crowd that evening, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. "This gallery is more than just a space for art," he said. "It's a space for voices that deserve to be heard, for stories that deserve to be told, and for people who deserve to feel seen. This isn't just my legacy, it's all of ours." The applause that followed was thunderous, but what touched Marcus most were the faces in the crowd, young artists who had found their footing, community members who had discovered the power of art, and even Gerald, standing quietly at the back of the room, clapping with a small smile. The Mosaic Gallery stood as a testament to what could be achieved when barriers were broken and opportunities were shared. Marcus had not only built a legacy, he had built a movement, one that would inspire generations to come.